In America's heartland, the American dream is in crisis. Just ask Don Tesk.
And people are going broke right and left.
Tesk is a fifth-generation farmer in Wheaton, Kansas, who at 62 years old says he's barely breaking even.
The corn was sold for $8 a few years ago. I sold my corn this year for $2.87, and that don't pay the bills.
Tesk says an increase in worldwide production is contributing to a multi-year decline in prices for key commodities like corn and wheat, all the while the cost of operating a farm is steadily increasing. The Department of Agriculture predicts farmers' incomes will drop an additional 9% this year, extending the worst slide in generations. As a result, more farm operations are expected to close, on top of the almost 140,000 that have closed or consolidated in the last 9 years.
Is one of our hay meadows that's owned by my grandma.
In Pottawatomie County, Kansas, 34-year-old Matt Ubel and his younger brother Tim are also fifth-generation farmers.
And you got guys my age that are trying to raise a family, trying to farm, and having to work in town just to produce cheap food for the country. It's a crisis.
The Ubels say they spent $34,000 last year farming wheat and other crops, but they only brought in $35,000. Though they may have found a solution. They now sell cattle and cut out the middleman. If these cattle go to slaughter, the Ubels might make $1,000 a head. But if they slaughter, process, and sell directly to the consumer themselves, each head could be worth $2,800. With an uncertain future for farmers, those like Don Tesk can only hope the family farm will survive.
And we're going to lose another generation of farmers through this, and that's sad.
To get a clearer picture of the pace of Nigeria's inflation, you just need to visit a local market like this one and try to find out from traders and shoppers alike what the price of goods are now and what they were a couple of weeks ago. So tell me, how much is the price of this stockfish now and how much was it before?
Now we say 2,300, but it was 2,000 naira before. The melon you are talking about, we are selling at 100 naira per cup. That is the main cup, which was selling at 120 now. The crayfish, it was cost the bag of the bucket of crayfish was around 6,000 naira. But now it's up to 7,500 naira as of today.
Before we sold this poly bag for 10 naira. Now it's 20 naira. We are selling 120 naira now.
Well, that gives you a rough sense of just how rapidly the prices of virtually every category of goods here change. The current inflation rate of 18.72% is not only the highest since September 2005, it's the 12th straight month we have seen an acceleration in the inflation rate. Nigeria is battling one of its worst foreign exchange crises as a result of significant reduction in the country's forex earnings. Its overwhelming dependence on imports has only exacerbated the inflation conundrum, and some are warning the inflation situation might get worse before it gets better.
Gathering a meal for the day, Kanze and her brothers are picking wild berries and cactus to feed their family. Drought in Bamba village has caused their maize harvest to fail for the 4th season running.
The drought has been going on for so long. We have nothing to harvest. We have lost our livelihood, and my children are hungry, so we have to look for food in the bush.
Poor rainfall means this family and 10,000 others here have nothing to live on. More than 60% of the people in the Ganze area rely on farming, but their crops have been decimated by the ongoing drought.
The drought is affecting at least 65,000 people in this community. The government is sending $60 a month to families to buy food and water or feed their livestock. But these cash transfers could end next week, leaving families with few places to turn because the drought is expected to worsen.
In Oslo, a conference is underway to address the humanitarian crisis in the Lake Chad region. Boko Haram's 8-year reign of terror has left millions displaced and vulnerable to starvation. People in the area are also suffering a severe famine. The affected region includes parts of Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria. The United Nations says nearly 11 million in the region are in need of aid, and more than 7 million people are threatened by starvation.
Drought often causes water shortages in the town of Kidal. The dry land in the Sahel region on the southern edge of the Sahara Desert is one of the harshest places to live on Earth. Unrest is compounding Kidal's many problems.
People here have suffered from successive droughts. The fighting has caused chaos. Many have been forced to leave and search for water, but to get to water they have to use pumps.
Pumps operate for just a few hours a day because of a lack of fuel. They don't supply enough water to meet demand.
We have a few wells, but the underground water runs deep, and we don't have pumps that can get it out. So we divide water from the wells between 9 neighborhoods. Each gets a share of water every 10 days.
A Tuareg rebellion 5 years ago was hijacked by fighters linked to Al-Qaeda. French troops drove them out a year later, but they continue to launch attacks from desert hideouts. Most engineers have left the area. The remaining men say basic services have almost totally broken down. Kidal has just one electricity generator. Its output is divided between 9 neighborhoods, which get a few hours of electricity every 3 days. A ceasefire agreed almost 2 years ago between the Malian government and the main separatist group is strained. UN forces are in northern Mali to provide stability, but they're unlikely to convince workers to return anytime soon.
Hungry miners take a break for lunch in Chile's Atacama Desert. But they are not here to work. Production at the world's biggest copper mine, La Escondida, is totally paralyzed, while its 2,500 workers dig in for a strike that's already in its 3rd week. A strike trade union members boast will be like none Chile has ever seen.
A worker who abandons the strike is considered a chicken, so we put their ID cards in this chicken coop. That worker would be marked for eternity as a coward. So the chicken coop is a powerful way to maintain the strike.
At the camp near the entrance to La Escondida, which produces 5% of the world's copper, miners are building a theater, clearly preparing for the long haul.
We helped build up this company and now they want to turn the clock back and take away our benefits. That has never happened.
The workers are demanding a 7% pay increase, while the company, which is majority controlled by the Anglo-Australian giant BHP Billiton, proposes no increase, fewer benefits, and inferior conditions to new employees. It's part of the company's goal to lower costs while increasing worker productivity, which has increased 48%, despite cutting 17% of the workforce 3 years ago. Copper prices are up 20% and rising, in part because of the supply disruption here at La Escondida, where a successful outcome of this strike could be replicated by other trade unions whose contracts are coming up. These miners have been saving up for this strike for more than a year and say they are prepared to stay out as long as it takes.
Foreign nationals living in South Africa say they fear for their safety following a fresh wave of anti-immigrant violence. Homes belonging to immigrants have been torched and several businesses looted in Johannesburg and the capital, Pretoria. Government officials are appealing for calm after Nigeria summoned South Africa's High Commissioner in Abuja to explain the current situation.
Looking to be all you can be? The U.S. Army is offering big cash bonuses and short enlistment contracts. The Army had been facing a drawdown over the past several years. That's all changed with the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act, which says that the Army needs to add 16,000 more soldiers to its active duty ranks by September 30th. That includes 6,000 new recruits, 9,000 re-enlisted soldiers, and 1,000 retained officers. In order to attract new talent and to keep more soldiers in uniform, the service is offering cash bonuses of up to $40,000, as well as scores of shortened 2-year contracts. In total, the Army plans to spend $300 million in bonuses and advertising over the next 8 months to recruit the thousands of additional soldiers it needs to fill out its ranks.
The president today flexing America's muscles on foreign policy, telling Reuters he wants to fortify the U.S.'s nuclear arsenal.
It would be wonderful. A dream would be that no country would have nukes. But if countries are going to have nukes, we're going to be at the top of the pack.
President Trump, who's come under fire for potential ties to Russia, now vowing he'll confront Russian President Vladimir Putin over that country's recent deployment of a cruise missile, a move that violated a decades-old arms control treaty. That potential showdown coming as the Trump administration tries to defuse a standoff with Mexico. Demonstrators there torching a fake wall overnight, highlighting real tensions. The latest flashpoint, Mr. Trump's new deportation policies.
We're getting gang members out. We're getting drug lords out. We're getting really bad dudes out of this country. And it's a military operation.
That comment today quickly contradicted by the president's head of Homeland Security, John Kelly, in Mexico.
There will be no mass deportation. No, repeat, no use of military force in immigration operations. None.
The White House later clarifying the meaning of military operation.
The president was using that as an adjective. It's happening with precision.
Among Mexico's complaints that the U.S. plans to deport anyone who illegally crosses the border back to Mexico, even if they're not Mexican. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson dispatched with Kelly to deal with the difficulties.
I said, that's going to be a tough trip because we have to be treated fairly by Mexico.
Tillerson trying to translate President Trump's tough talk into diplomacy.
Two strong sovereign countries from time to time will have differences.
And emphasizing the divide between the two allies, many Mexican lawmakers were demanding that President Peña Nieto refuse to meet with Secretaries Tillerson and Kelly today. But ultimately, that meeting did happen. So far, no public comments from either side on what, if anything, was accomplished.
An internal memo obtained by Eyewitness News to New York City police officers says the NYPD will not enforce administrative warrants issued by immigration officials. Police Commissioner James O'Neill told officers that the NYPD's policy will not change as a result of the Trump administration's new deportation policies. O'Neill says the NYPD won't detain people for immigration violations like overstaying their visas, but it will continue to take people into custody who are at risk to public safety.
Public statements are coming to light from companies such as Yahoo Inc., Apple Inc., and Microsoft Corp. To decry the Trump administration's decision to rescind the Obama-era guideline for Title IX that protects transgender students, allowing them to use the bathroom and locker room of their choice. With statements echoing those issued in response to North Carolina's bathroom bill, HB 2, companies announced their stances on protecting transgender rights. The Trump administration has declared the issue a states' rights issue, with social conservatives hailing the decision as a victory for privacy and traditional values. Even so, companies are pressuring the states to keep the protections for its students in place. We support efforts toward greater acceptance, not less, and we strongly believe that transgender students should be treated as equals, Apple said in a statement. Microsoft President Brad Smith said on Twitter, "Since January 1st, 1863, the federal government has played a vital role in protecting the rights of all Americans. Let's not stop now," referencing President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Eliminating federal protections for transgender students opens the door for more states to pursue legislation similar to North Carolina's HB 2.
Marijuana use for any reason is still technically illegal in the eyes of the federal government, and White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer hinted the Trump administration might start reminding states of that fact soon.
There's two distinct issues here: medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. There is still a federal law that we need to abide by in terms of the medical, when it comes to recreational marijuana and other drugs of that nature.
States that have legalized medical marijuana use are safe from federal interference thanks to a 2014 budget rule passed by Congress. But the 8 states and the District of Columbia that have legalized recreational pot use don't have any such protection from federal drug enforcement. The Obama administration generally respected the state laws when it came to drug enforcement. President Trump's Department of Justice might not be as forgiving.
That's a question for the Department of Justice. I do believe that you'll see greater enforcement of it.
Trump has previously sounded willing to let states set their own marijuana laws, but his Attorney General Jeff Sessions is a staunch opponent of pot legalization.
An independent watchdog in the UK has accused the government of underreporting nuclear incidents dating back several decades. The Nuclear Information Service published a report listing 110 major alerts as well as 116 fatalities among British nuclear workers, mainly due to radioactive contamination. Some of the incidents are particularly alarming. The Royal Navy mistakenly took atomic depth charges to the Falklands War in 1982 aboard the ship on which Prince Andrew was serving. In southern England in 1987, the Defense Ministry imposed an information blackout after 4 nuclear bombs fell off a truck and ended up in a roadside ditch. While in 2009, British and French submarines, both carrying nuclear warheads, nearly collided in the Atlantic. With more of the details, here's Harry Fear.
Well, this report by the Nuclear Information Service, a not-for-profit, paints a very disturbing picture and it undermines previous official records. Well, of course, one accident with any one of the 120 nukes could be enough to risk disaster, which hasn't happened. But there has been a cost. The NIS says 116 deaths of UK citizens have resulted from Britain's nukes programme. Breaking that down, there have been 7 industrial accidents, 9 suspected radiological contamination incidents, and there were 100 fatal cancers as a result of the 1957 Windscale reactor fire. And so there have been accidents that you can class as having put the public at risk. So 6 nuclear weapons were damaged. My favourite is the following one: 4 unintentional nuclear detonations, 27 fires, and 8 explosions. And that flies in the face of what the government has said. A lorry toppling over that has nukes on board sounds pretty hazardous to the public to me, as does a missile firing off towards the wrong country. Might also strike you as a hazard. Of course, last month we learned that there was a test missile misfire last summer, a malfunction that led to a missile having to self-destruct off of the US coast. But the details of that, remember, were kept from British MPs ahead of their Trident renewal vote later last summer in July. So no doubt there may now be more anger from in-the-dark MPs following the release of this week's report too.
The UK Ministry of Defence has responded by saying in more than 50 years there has never been an incident posing any radiation hazard to the public or the environment. However, the report's authors claim the ministry is downplaying the seriousness of what happened.
A report shows the MOD's response to an accident is to downplay it and to hope nobody noticed it. This stops lessons from being learned and ultimately makes us all less safe. With nuclear weapons, the risks are so large the MOD should not be allowed to continue to regulate itself.
Now, North Korea has unleashed some rare criticism on China over Beijing's condemnation of the regime's recent ballistic missile launch and its import ban on North Korean coal. The North state-run Korean Central News Agency said Thursday that a neighbouring country, which often refers to itself as a friendly neighbour, is showing an unkind attitude to North Korea. In its typical blustery tone, the North accused China of undermining the significance of its launch this month of a new type of intermediate-range ballistic missile. The regime's state-run mouthpiece also said China had taken an inhumane step by blocking foreign trade related to the improvement of the people's living standards under the guise of adhering to legally dubious international sanctions. It even said China is dancing to the tune of the US, referring to Beijing's implementation of the UN resolutions against North Korea.
And now Amnesty International has strongly criticized India for using excessive force against protesters in Kashmir. Experts believe the Indian government continues to resort to force against demonstrators to suppress the dominant political sentiment in the Himalayan region. Here's more of the report by Press TV's Syed Ali Safi.
Amnesty International has slammed India for using what it called the crude colonial-era sedition law to silence government critics. In its annual report, the global human rights watchdog body has accused Indian forces of resorting to, quote, unnecessary and excessive force against pro-freedom demonstrators in the disputed territory. The report also criticizes New Delhi for imposing wide-ranging restrictions on mobile and internet services, newspapers, and arresting rights activists on false grounds.
Now, the water is receding in some places, but not completely in this particular neighborhood. Still, some people will be allowed to go home this evening.
Right past the body of a drowned skunk, Jonathan Rascon Mata walked to his flooded Rock Springs Avenue apartment wearing homemade trash bag booties. He doesn't want the filth to ruin his last pair of shoes.
Just wrapped it up in plastic
so I don't, get my shoes dirty, because then I would have to throw them away. Can't afford to throw them away right now.
He wore them as he entered his apartment for the first time since the flood. Here's why.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
The first floor is covered by a thick film of mud. Furniture, electronics, kitchen appliances, all ruined.
It's a lot, You can't come back to your own house. So it's a big loss.
Throughout the neighborhood, it's flooded cars, some swamped in mid-street as they tried to drive away, and flooded homes. Most of the apartment buildings are spray painted with an X on the wall or garage, meaning the city deemed it unsafe to occupy.
We didn't get any warnings, so they kind of just let the water out, and this happened. So if they would have gave us a warning or something to take close out at least or something.
Neighbors began cleaning up and salvaging what they could.
California is looking at its lowest drought levels since 2011. Just a year ago, the Golden State was only 6% drought-free. Now it's at 83%. No part of California is in extreme drought, a first in 4 years. It's probably not surprising news given the deluge that's pounded the state lately. Heavy rains damaged roads, downed power lines, and forced people out of their homes. According to the Los Angeles Almanac, the City of Angels has already received almost 7 inches more than it normally does at this point in the year. Governor Jerry Brown declared a state of emergency in 2014 as the drought stretched into year 2. He hasn't changed that declaration since, even with these new figures. A spokeswoman for the California Natural Resource Agency told NBC News the state now has to be prepared for the possibility of more floods. She said the state is on track to have its wettest year on record.
On Wednesday, the United States Geological Survey reported that a 4.2 magnitude earthquake struck just northwest of Washington state. According to the USGS website, the quake was recorded approximately 75 miles west of Seattle, Washington at around 9 p.m. local time. No initial reports of damage or casualties in the surrounding areas have been reported, and the National Weather Service stated via Twitter that no tsunami was expected as a result of the quake. Scientists are scrambling to understand the rapidly increasing speed of surface melting in Greenland after melting started early and spread fast in 2016. By April of last year, 12% of the ice sheet's surface was melting, whereas in an average year, the melt doesn't even reach 10% until around June. Geophysicist Isabella Velaconia of the University of California, Irvine said, "Nobody expected the ice sheet to lose so much mass so quickly. Things are happening a lot faster than we expected. The accelerating surface melt has doubled Greenland's contribution to global sea level rise since 1992 to 2011 to 0.74 millimeters per year. With a thick mantle of ice holding the equivalent of more than 7 meters of sea level rise, the need for scientists to determine why and how the melting might evolve in the future is even more urgent."
meters, pila dyan pag i-fit? Meters, di 20 feet, bro. 20 feet, 6 meters, man.